Hello viewers, it's Joe here from Rufio. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome aboard. You should definitely hit subscribe and the notification bell before we go any further and you realise how fucking garbage this content is. But if this is not your first time on the channel, welcome back. I forgot to put my cool lighting, didn't I? No, it just looks awful. Oh well, you're here to listen to me and not to look at my face, so don't worry, I won't be here looking at you for very long. For today's content, we are going to be taking a look at 40k's very own smurfs. And when I say we're taking a look at the Ultramarines, we're actually taking a look at Roboute Guilliman and the Ultramarines by extension. Now, if you're someone who's already been around the game for a little while, the Ultramarines may be kind of boring to you, but I think credit where credit is due. Roboute Guilliman is one of the very few cool things about our poster boys. So, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. Roboute Guilliman is the only person cool enough to make me give a single fuck about the Ultramarines. Which is someone who loves Chaos Space Marines, that says an awful lot. So anyway, enough waffling on from me, let's get stuck into the video. Roboute Guilliman is the Primarch of the poster boys of the Warhammer 40k setting, the Ultramarines. The same smurf guys most people think of when they hear the words Space Marines. Now, whilst I'm not a big fan of the Ultramarines themselves, and mostly because I'm a little bit edgy and I like chaos, Roboute Guilliman is admittedly one of the few redeeming features of this legion in my mind. Currently, Guilliman is the Lord Commander of the Imperium and ruling Imperial Regent. He's more or less seen as the leader of everything and about as close as anyone could be to filling the role of the Emperor, who is busy on the throne. So who exactly is Roboute Guilliman and what makes him more or less the prodigal son? Well, let's go a little closer to how it all began. When Guilliman and his brothers were created by the Emperor before being yeeted through the warp and scattered all over the place, Guilliman was fortunate enough to land on Macragge, where he was adopted by a local warlord named Konor. Guilliman, under the guidance of Konor, there grew rapidly, developing at a rate of knots, and surpassing everyone around him both in physical form and intellect. He quickly became an incredible warrior, a genius in strategy and a well-respected statesman upon Macragge. He became an accomplished warlord too in his own right. One good example of Roboute Guilliman's diplomacy was his handling of the Illyrians. For years he'd ran campaigns to subdue the wild men of Illyrium, who terrorised the civilised regions endlessly. He fought these campaigns so well that the wild men kept well clear of the civilised regions of Macragge. And although it's often surmised that Guilliman simply gave them a pasting, the truth is far more docile and in many ways far more impressive. Guilliman chose, rather than be drawn into long, painful guerrilla warfare in the mountains, to take and occupy the Illyrian sacred shrines. In doing so, he forced their hand to meet him under his terms. Now, instead of just crushing them as he well could have, he challenged their chieftain to a battle. Naturally, Roboute was a class above. He was so confident in his plan that he chose to defend himself from attacks from his enemy, but never chose to move to strike him back. Eventually, the chieftain would become exhausted. An opportunity for Roboute to put him to the sword was, well, one option, but not the one that he chose. He instead presented him with the most sacred Illyrian religious artifact, which had been stolen some centuries before by the consuls of Macragge. This act of humanity convinced the chieftain to halt his campaign and brought an end to the conflict. However, when he returned to the capital, he found the city in shreds. His father's co-consul, Gallen, had launched an attempted coup along with a number of Macragge's nobility, who had turned sour over Conor's legislation which helped the common man. They instead preferred their wealth and power over their armies of slaves and, in their resentment, had flipped the tables, so to speak. Guilliman ordered his soldiers to restore order to the city. But after breaking a siege on the consul house, he found his father close to death, surrounded by his loyal bodyguards. An assassin under Gallen's command had carried out the orders, and with his dying breath, Konor informed Guilliman as to who was responsible. Roboute proceeded to smash the rebellion and punish the traitorous bastards who'd betrayed his father. Gallen and his co-conspirators were executed. Their lands and wealth returned to the people. You know, proper commie utopia shit. Guilliman then set about installing the plans his father had made before his demise. Guilliman would eventually unify Macragge after the death of his foster father, taking up the mantle of kingship. And in the time that would follow, Macragge became a world that prospered under his leadership. Being a charismatic leader, Rpboute grew quickly to be loved by his people. Being a resourceful and organised man, he quickly ensured order would follow. He was peaceful, civilised, full of wisdom and strength, many of the same qualities Guilliman represented, and many of the same qualities he would pass down to his eventual legion. Guilliman's real father, the Emperor, would reunite with our main character when his crusade reached Macragge in the late 30th millennium, and Guilliman would find himself marked as the leader of the Ultramarines, and in no time at all the Legion was moulded into his own image, setting an example of what is expected of a Space Marine. The Legion fought with incredible tactical prowess and with extreme precision and efficiency, exactly the kind of traits you'd expect from a Legion led by Big Blue himself. When Horus launched his heresy, initially he had managed to trick Guilliman and his Ultramarines, sending them to the Viridian system while he executed his plot, knowing full well that one of the greatest forms of resistance he might face would come from the stellar Ultramarines and their Primarch. This worked a charm, and while Horus sought to see the galaxy burn, after revealing his treachery, Guilliman was too poorly placed to react with any meaningful ability at that time. The Ultramarines were attacked by the Wordbearers, who diminished the Ultramarines' numbers significantly, but Guilliman doubled down, fighting with ferocious loyalty and sheer determination to defend the Imperium he loved so much. Lorgar attempted to assassinate Guilliman, but in true anime protagonist style, he managed to reboard his flagship, which was under attack. A Wordbearer's commander by the name of Kor Phaeron tried to tempt Guilliman to join the forces of Chaos, and in exchange Guilliman ripped one of his 2 hearts out. Yes, 2 hearts, I don't know why, probably a topic for another video. Whilst Guilliman and his Ultramarines were being kept rather busy on Calth, Angron, along with his World Eaters and Lorgar of the Wordbearers, had launched a Shadow Crusade on some of the more isolated worlds in Ultramar, in an attempt to obliterate as much of Ultramar as they could in Guilliman's absence. Guilliman, of course, managed to win the day on Calth before travelling using a warp jump point to the outer fringes of Ultramar, where he happened to meet with Sanguinius of the Blood Angels. Together they would launch a counter-offensive against the Shadow Crusade that had been set in motion. They fought valiantly, but Guilliman was almost slain by Angron. Fortunately, he was bailed out by his loyal Ultramarines. As the Ruin Storm created by the Wordbearers cut him off from the Imperium, he feared it was lost. And so he began rebuilding a second empire, Imperium Secundus, as a backup plan. Many of the Loyalist brothers were brought to Macragge. Being the clever clogs he was, he didn't declare himself the new emperor since he didn't want to risk appearing to be power-hungry, as Horus had been. He initially tried to get Lionel Johnson to do it, but after a series of disagreements and fighting with the likes of Conrad Kurz, Sanguinius would become the regent of the Imperium Secundus. When he later learned that Terra still stood and that the Emperor lived, he did everything he could to back his loyal brothers, hoping to fight alongside the Emperor and kill the heresy off once and for all. But for all his valiant efforts, he reached Terra too late. Something he would feel the agony of in every fibre of his being for solar decades after the fact. The Iron Warriors had laid out a large defensive chain of hundreds of worlds. They entered in bitter sieges and engagements, and although both sides took heavy losses, it slowed the advancement of the Ultramarines for just long enough. The reality is that their impending arrival forced Horus to allow the Emperor to teleport onto his battle barge, and the rest is history. In the aftermath of the heresy, when the Emperor had been incapacitated, Guilliman took up the Emperor's burning blade. And being the leader of the largest remaining loyal legion, he became the Lord Commander of the Imperium, setting the standards expected of all those who devoted themselves to the Imperium's advancement, and was even responsible for instituting the Codex Astartes, which laid out the proper tactics and organisation for almost all the Loyalist chapters that currently exist. He also discussed with a tech priest, Belisarius Karl, and charged him with 2 main objectives: plan for Guilliman's resurrection should he fall, and the creation of the next generation of Space Marines. From here, Guilliman worked tirelessly and single-handedly moulded the Imperium and reformed it into something that was blossoming, but this was ultimately to be in vain. Guilliman is one of the few remaining Loyalist Primarchs who still lives, although his dance with death was but moments from coming to a grim end, after his traitor brother, the Snake Boy Fulgrim, juked him in the neck with a chaos-tainted blade. Guilliman fortunately had plenty of plot armour, and so instead of shuffling off this mortal coil, he was placed into temporal stasis and placed upon the throne that lay in the Temple of Correction on Macragge. And that is exactly where he would remain for 10 millennia, visited countless times from pilgrims of the Imperium. Guilliman's progress in the Imperium was rotting away as he remained in stasis, decaying in every passing moment that he was not truly present. Eventually, he was resurrected during the 13th Black Crusade by Belisarius Cawl, with the assistance of an Eldari princess, just in the nick of time. He was placed into a suit of power armour that had regenerated his wounds, and allowed him to be brought back from certain death. As the Black Legion invaded Macragge, Guilliman rose up, and set about driving back the Chaos invaders. He even performed some miracles along the way, his mere presence curing affliction caused by Nurgle and more. Guilliman observed what had become of the Imperium. Superstition and ignorance was rife. This was not the Imperium that he'd sought to build. When the Great Rift opened and blasted the galaxy with countless warp storms and effectively dissected the territory of the Imperium of Man, Guilliman would launch his Terran crusade in an effort to rip back some of the power from Chaos, which admittedly had grown to be near insurmountable. Once more he would find himself near death at the hands of his Primarch brother turned demon, but this time it was Magnus the Red. And furthermore, he was almost imprisoned for an eternity in the Maelstrom. None of this, of course, would stop him from reaching Holy Terror, where he would rendezvous with the Emperor for the first time in more than 10,000 years. When he emerged, he announced that he would once again take up his role as the de facto ruler of the Imperium. As the Great Rift continued to disrupt interstellar travel and communications, Guilliman made great strides in a bid and attempt to stabilise the muddy-looking future of the Imperium. Once more, he turned to Belisarius Cawl in an attempt to complete a plan which had begun 10,000 years ago, a time which coincided with the end of the Horus Heresy. The plan was always to strive to improve the Space Marines. Cawl had spent this time that had passed working on perfecting the original genetic template of the Space Marines, creating a new legion of hundreds of thousands of evolved Astartes, deep beneath the surface of his forge on Mars. Thus, the Primaris Space Marines were born. They were larger, had greater physical attributes, they were even quicker than their predecessors. Not only this, but the limitations of their power armour had been smashed in so many ways. But, like all things in 40k, nothing nice can happen without a hitch. Not even for our main characters like the Chad Guilliman. Just when he thought things were beginning to look positive, the Chaos God Khorne decided to slap his meat on the table, if you know what I mean. Khorne launched a demonic assault on the throne world of mankind, kicking off the Battle of Lion's Gate. Guilliman would lead the likes of the Sisters of Battle and Adeptus Custodes in a bid to counter the Blood God. But the assault was enough to send a message loud and clear to the High Lords of Terror. Ruinous powers were here to stay, and nothing was safe from their ire. In the fallout of the Battle of Lion's Gate, Guilliman would forge the greatest Imperial force that had been seen since the times of the Great Crusade, made up of a stack of different forces including our previously discussed Primaris Space Marines, half making up the new Adeptus Astartes chapters, and half split into 9 different formations known as the Unnumbered Sons. From here, Guilliman launched the Indomitus Crusade, a batshit crazy plan to put the forces of Chaos to the sword, and an attempt to strike down the Xenos wherever they threatened the homes of men. The Indomitus Crusade would see his plans enacted, sweeping clean planets which were otherwise living in terror, breaking the backs of Xeno invaders, and restoring a glimmer of hope to humanity. The Indomitus Crusade's first major phase would come to a close as he turned his focus to the realm of Ultramar in order to defeat the Death Guard traitors, led by his Nurgle-serving brother Mortarion, and driving them out, ending their plague wars in the process. Although there is an acceptance that the threat may return at any given moment. And that brings us to our more recent lore. The threats against humanity continue to double down, and with the release of 10th edition, it seems like humanity's greatest threat has moved on from itself to an unending hunger in the form of the Tyranids. It remains to be seen what hope Guilliman will bring to an Imperium that finds itself, once again, on its knees.